Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae here joining Ted Rollins, and we are covering this new information out of Ohio that there is a guilty verdict for SydneyPowell. All counts. This jury came back after 9.5 hours, Ted.
Yeah, they took their time over 3 days. And at the end of the day, though, as Shanley Painter pointed out with their mannerisms in the courtroom, they just didn't believe SydneyPowell was suffering from an acute mental breakdown when she murdered her mother in 2018. Let's start the hour by looking back. If you missed it, this is what happened when the verdict was read.
Verdict form number 1 as to count 1 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant SydneyPowell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1. The form goes on to say, and we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed in ink next to his or her name." Verdict form number 2 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant SydneyPowell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 2. And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed their name in ink next to their juror number." Verdict form number 3 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant SydneyPowell guilty of the offense of felonious assault as charged in count 3. And it reads, "And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed his or her name in ink next to their juror number." And finally, verdict form number 4 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant SydneyPowell guilty of the offense of tampering with evidence as charged in count 4. Below that it says, "And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023, and each juror has signed in ink next to their juror number."
And that was the response from this jury. That was the reaction from SydneyPowell.
Yeah,
I haven't seen a defendant react quite like that inside of a courtroom. Let's bring in someone who's been on the ground for all of this, Court TV legal correspondent Shanley Painter. Shanley, I'm curious to know if the jury seemed to be impacted at all by the way SydneyPowell reacted to their verdict.
I was looking for that, Julia, and not at all. As the guilty verdicts were being read one after the other, the sounds coming from SydneyPowell in the courtroom increased in volume, and from the gallery, her friends and family crying. None of the jurors seemed moved by her demeanor and reaction to their guilty verdicts. In fact, all 12 of their heads were turned this way, looking towards the judge. Not one glanced over to look at her that would have been right in front of them. I've really never seen that inside of a courtroom, and to me, that sent a message of exactly what they were thinking and feeling about the defendant SydneyPowell when she murdered her mother in 2020. They didn't buy the defense of insanity here. But what was also unique about this case is that the entire courtroom gallery, Julia and Ted, were full of family members, not only of Sydney, the defendant, but of Brenda, the victim in this case. The victim in this case, the friends and family are there for Sydney. It's such a unique circumstance here in this matter. You also could sense the close relationship between the defendant, Sydney, and her attorney, Don Milarczyk, who put his heart and soul into this case in representing her as if she was his own daughter, is what he's told me. And she immediately turns to him once she starts what seemed like kind of hyperventilating or crying uncontrollably, is what it sounded like in the courtroom. He immediately, put his arm on her to comfort her in those moments, trying to calm her down. The bailiffs moved to a position behind her that they weren't at originally when the verdict was beginning to be read, just in case, something did happen in her reaction. And then after the jury stood to leave, she hugged her attorney for the longest time until she had to be handcuffed and remanded for the first time she's been out on bond, and you could tell that was a traumatic experience for her inside the courtroom after the jury left to be handcuffed and led away. And then in the hallway, of course, our cameras were in the hallway as well, being escorted out into the hallway and down the elevator, where she will have a sentencing hearing in about a week or so. But this was definitely a verdict that you could tell many people who showed up to support her weren't really expecting.
Yeah, that sentencing September 28th, and it'll be up to Judge McLaughlin. There's a pretty wide choice to make, 15 to life, and depending on concurrent or consecutive serving, she might have life after, or maybe not, depending on what the judge decides. And of course, Chanley then will also get a feel for the state of Ohio. The prosecution will have a say in terms of a recommendation, what they'll ask this judge to impose. We haven't heard much from them, I know, but that will definitely change its sentencing.
It definitely will. I am looking forward to hear what they're going to do, because remember, this is a family who approached the prosecutor's office here on multiple occasions as recently as 2 weeks before this trial began, through their attorney, with their attorney, Jeff Laborn, who we've also spoken to try to convince this office not to pursue the trial. Not necessarily to really drop the charges, but to not go through with this, that the way she's been treated over the last 3 years, living with her maternal grandparents, not missing any part of her condition of bail, should be the status quo moving forward. That's what they were wanting. So will the prosecution's office take into consideration the wishes of the victim's family now in this sentencing? What will they do? Usually we see prosecutors come in, ask for the maximum for the viciousness of the crime, and this was a vicious attack. We've seen those photos. We couldn't, of course, show our viewers the photos and videos, but it was a vicious attack. So what will this prosecution's office do? Will they consider what the family wants at this point in the juncture or not? That's the big question for me right now, Ted and Julia.
Chanley, amazing analysis and insight. We understand that we're actually getting a live feed from inside of the courthouse that you're standing in front of. Let's take a live look. We don't know yet exactly who is speaking, but let's see if we can listen in to what is happening.
That it did not cause her to kill her mother. We've always believed it was purposeful killing, and the jury has agreed with that sentiment, that she purposely did it. She wasn't doing it by accident, and that she wasn't doing it because she was mentally ill. And so we believe they've confirmed our belief from the start in this case.
So Brian, you weren't in the courtroom, so can you explain your role in the trial?
Well, my role in the trial is I supervised the prosecutors that tried this case. And of course, I was involved in the beginning with the initial case and indictment and charging of the case, and some of the negotiations of the case early on. But Brian and Joe tried this case. They put hours and hours in this case, reviewing all of the expert testimony that they had provided to us, because it was obviously their burden to go forward on the not guilty by reason of insanity defense. And they, I think, saw through all the holes and through all the discrepancies in all three of their reports and why they disagreed with each other. And I think the jury saw through it too. So that was my role. It was basically a supervisory role during the trial.
So the defense had 3 mental health experts, including this treating psychiatrist, and you had 1. So how is it that your expert was more credible than theirs, their team of 4?
Well, as you know, quantity and quality are 2 different things. And the fact is that their experts, were paid a lot of money. They're highly qualified experts, but they were paid to come to a certain conclusion, is generally what happens. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired them. In our situation, we went to a local doctor who is used by this court to evaluate defendants on a regular basis, whether it's for insanity, competency, and she does that on a regular basis. She was not hired. We didn't have to go to New York or some other state to get her. She's right up the street. And matter of fact, I think the fact that she testified, that she just recently testified against our position on the case, that gave her credibility. She doesn't care whose side she's testifying for. She's going to do her report. She's going to give an expert opinion, and it's going to be fair. And I think the fact that they had 3 experts that did not agree amongst themselves probably gave her more credibility, especially because of all the things that Brian and Joe pointed out during the trial that they did not review. They didn't review anything about what happened at the time of the trial. They didn't review her phone records, her conversations. They just reviewed certain things that led them to the conclusion that they were seeking. And so that's why I think our expert, and I say our expert, she's just an expert, that we asked to evaluate this case, and I think she came to the right conclusion.
So Brian, how did you reconcile the idea that the victims, or the victims that the law recognizes in this case, the widower Brenda Powell, and her family, the maternal grandparents, support your defendant?
That is one of the reasons this case, I think, is so difficult, is because there's absolutely no winners in this case. The victim's family is torn apart by this. I know that they wanted to see a different outcome that we couldn't agree on. But the fact is that our responsibility as prosecutor's office is not just to the victims. It's also to the community. And based on the facts and the circumstances of Sydney's actions during that whole entire event, we believe that she could be a danger to other people in the community, and that she was not just a danger to her mother. And so we felt that even though the family wanted one outcome, we felt that justice for the community required another outcome, and that's why we pursued this case. Otherwise, we would have resolved it in some way. So our hearts go out to the family. We understand that we disagree and that they have a different opinion, but that doesn't mean they're not suffering, and I know they're suffering and will continue to suffer, especially, Mr. Powell. I mean, his daughter, his wife, it's incredibly sad.
Now, I understand that they pleaded with you not to prosecute this case. I mean, would that have even been an option?
They asked us not to. They asked us to resolve it for, I believe it was a misdemeanor offense and some community control probation. We did not believe that that's what justice required in this case for the community. And so we just couldn't do that.
So what next? I mean, she's scheduled for sentencing next week. What is the state going to recommend?
Well, in Ohio, there's basically only one option at this point. The minimum sentence she can get for a murder is 15 to life. So she will get a 15 to life sentence. The only real issue in this case is whether the judge runs the other charges consecutively, because there's a tampering and a felonious assault. And so those are, 2 to 8 and, up to 3 years. So, the maximum she could get would basically be, 26 years.
26 years day for day?
No, I'm sorry, 26 years to life.
26 years to life.
And that would be a maximum sentence.
But you have some leeway in terms of recommending. Right?
Oh, right. Well, we could recommend anything between 15 to life up to that 26 to life.
And so what would weigh in her favor for a more lenient sentence as far as you're concerned?
Well, I'm not sure at this point that the difference between 26 to life and 15 to life is what we're concerned about. She would have to go to the parole board no matter what. She could do 15 to life and still get out after 26 years. That's not our biggest concern. Our biggest concern isn't the sentence at this point. She's going to get a minimum 15 to life. And basically our concern is that she was held responsible for killing her mother. And that's our biggest concern. And the judge will take care of the sentencing. She's a great judge, and she will do what she feels is appropriate for the community.
Now there's potentially appeal issues, or do you think this was an error-free trial?
Well, any prosecutor wants to say when they try a case it's an error-free trial. I didn't try it. But I'm sure if we ask Brian and Joe, they're going to tell you that they wished it was, but no trial is without any errors. Whether they're important or significant errors is not the question. It's not our concern. We believe that they did, by rule what they were required to do. I don't believe that there was any errors that are going to affect the outcome of this case. I believe this judge is very good at keeping control, following the rules of law, and enforcing them within the court. I don't see that as an issue. There will always be an appeal. We know that. There's never been a murder conviction that hasn't had an appeal, as far as I know, after trial. But I'm not overly concerned about any issues in this case.
So if there was one thing that you could point out, what do you think resonated with these jurors to get them to where they convicted her of all counts?
I would hope to think that it's the same thing that resonated with our office, and that is that.
All right, we need to slip in a commercial break here, but we'll have more of our continuing coverage of the state of Ohio versus Powell, ending in a guilty verdict in all counts. The big question now, how long will she serve? You heard the prosecutors say it's going to be between 15 to life, and the max would be 26 to life. She'll be sentenced on September 28th. Back with more coverage right after this.
On closing arguments, diving deeper into the Delphi murders as the alleged killer awaits trial. New developments have shed light on the investigation. We'll break down what's been uncovered and what to expect next. Plus, on the docket, a Georgia mother who reported her toddler son missing now stands accused of his murder. We'll bring you all the tragic details before Leilani Simon faces a jury.
Closing arguments tonight at 8/7 Central.